The following is a listener-supported ministry from the Grace Evangelical Society.
Is it possible to recreate the original text of Scripture such that it could be equal to the original autographs? Well, that somewhat complex and important question is one we're going to talk about on today's episode of Grace in Focus. Hi, I'm Lucas Kitchen. Welcome to Grace in Focus. In today's episode, we will not only answer this question, but we want to open the invitation for you to send your questions in as well. You can do that by sending us an email, radio@faithalone.org. We'd love to hear from you. Well, let's get right to today's discussion with Dr. Bob Wilkin and Shawn Lazar. Here's Grace in Focus.
Welcome to Grace in Focus. My name's Shawn Lazar.
Hi, I'm Bob Wilkin.
And I don't know why I went up there in pitch. Is to make our voices more interesting. So instead of just us talking monotone, we got to vary our voices a little bit.
Oh, what'd you say?
We're still learning. We're still learning this. We're not radio people, but I guess we are at
we
this
are
point.
now. This is like
500 plus episodes.
You say almost 600. This is 2 years worth.
Well, you guys keep listening and you keep supporting us, and we're really grateful for that. And we keep trying to answer your questions to the best of our ability. Here's a question from Colby, and Colby says, my question is, with so many learned Bible scholars who are fluent in Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic, wouldn't we be able to create a copy of the Bible that is close, if not identical, to the autographa, which is basically, what the apostles actually, the first time they put pen to paper or pen to papyri, that would be the autographa, the document that John or Matthew, Mark, or Paul actually wrote.
Right.
Is it possible to recreate a physical, completely inerrant copy of the Bible in today's age?
And what were the versions he was talking about?
Oh, he just said if someone knew Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic, all these experts, shouldn't we be able to do that?
Well, the answer to the question is complicated. This is called textual criticism. It doesn't mean we're criticizing the text. It means we're studying the text in order to determine the correct reading.
Right.
Now, if you go back to books of antiquity, we find there are very few manuscripts of various books like Caesar's Gallic Wars. I believe there's 10 copies, and there's something like 1,000 years after Caesar wrote it that we have the 10 copies. The same thing is true with most books of antiquities. There's very few copies, and they're very far after the actual writing. In the case of the New Testament, for example, we're approaching now 6,000 manuscripts. They keep finding more manuscripts. Now, these manuscripts don't cover the entire New Testament.
It'll be like a portion. It'll be a scrap of paper with a portion of a passage.
Well, the smallest would be, like a verse or two, but most of them would cover multiple books, at least one book, multiple books. Mm-hmm. Some cover the entire New Testament. But we have almost 6,000 copies, and the result is on every given verse in the New Testament, we have lots of readings, 100 to 1,000 readings on every given verse.
Right.
And when we compare these readings, we can come up with the autographa. The problem is not that we have, let's say, 98% of what was written. The problem is we have like 102% of what was written.
Okay.
And so we have to go through extra material and say, okay, what was added? Of course, in some cases, people will say things were taken away. Mm-hmm. And so the textual critics are studying and saying, what is the original reading? We were taught in seminary certain canons or rules of textual criticism. One is that the shorter reading is preferred over the longer reading, but another canon which contradicts it is the harder reading is preferred over the shorter reading.
The easier reading.
I'm so confused here.
No, that's okay.
And so sometimes the shorter reading is the harder reading.
Right.
And if so, now the shorter reading is preferred, but if the longer reading is the harder reading, now it's preferred.
Right.
Except maybe it's not. Because another thing is if it's too hard, then you don't prefer it. I mean, if it's so hard to the point of being absurd...
And by hard, you mean it makes the phrase a more difficult teaching, or it just makes it just a little bit harder to understand in context.
Right. It doesn't fit the context.
Yeah.
And so there's all these canons, and they tend to prefer the earlier readings to the later readings. And there are other canons. My understanding of New Testament textual criticism is that the majority of manuscripts carry the correct reading, that God was superintending the process of copying such that the majority of surviving manuscripts do carry the correct reading. I would say that if you find the vast majority of manuscripts falling on one side of a reading, that's the correct reading.
Right.
So, for example, 1 John 4:19, is it we love him because he first loved us, or we love because he first loved us? The majority of manuscripts say we love him because he first loved us. But there are a few early manuscripts that say we love because he first loved us. Well, because it's shorter, that's to be preferred. Because there's a few early manuscripts, people would say that's to be preferred. And it's harder, too, so they would say that's to be preferred. But the vast majority of manuscripts contain it, and it's really too hard. In answer to this question, can we get back to an inerrant manuscript? Well, what we have is inerrant, but it's only inerrant to the degree that we have it exactly right. And so if the person wants to say we have everything exactly right, the spelling of every name is absolutely correct, no, I don't think we can go there. We may have, because there are spelling variations in the Scriptures, and we have to make a decision, because sometimes the scribes would get the spelling wrong.
Right.
And the question is, well, which was the correct spelling of a name? That's a lot of the issues, is just the spelling of words.
Sure, yeah, so maybe we should say that. People need to remember, like, this is way before the printing press. The printing press was, what, the 16th century in Germany? So if you're talking about the first century Rome or first century Ephesus...
I think it was 15th, wasn't it? 14th,
it was at the first, so maybe it
or
was maybe 15th century.
Yeah.
But we're talking about people sitting by candlelight, copying out these huge portions of letters and books by hand.
Right.
Have you ever tried copying a book just try copying a book of the Bible by hand. Just take a piece of paper, take a chapter out of the Bible, and try just writing it out, and then checking to see if you've made any mistakes whatsoever.
Now, that's a great point. Fortunately for us, and there's controversy too about this, but these people who did it for the most part were professional scribes.
Right.
In other words, they weren't just like you or me trying to do what you just suggested. These are people who did this for a living.
Sure.
And they were very good at it. And because they were copying Scripture, and they knew it was Scripture, and they believed it was Scripture, they took exceeding care.
Even so, they made thousands and thousands of mistakes in the sense of they spelt the name slightly wrong, or sometimes,
I think the number of total mistakes in the New Testament is over 400,000. But we know they're mistakes because we compare manuscripts.
Right.
But most of those mistakes are spelling.
Right, they're insignificant.
Most of them make no
right.
difference to the meaning of the text. And so, when it comes down to it, what we have, we can be extremely confident that we have what was written. But that doesn't mean that there aren't a few places where there are questions. And there are a few. And in those cases, we should know what the options are. And in most cases, like the biggest ones would be John 7:53 to 8:11, the woman caught in adultery, which is carried in the vast majority of manuscripts. And nearly every English translation includes it, even though ones that follow the so-called critical text put it brackets,
they'll bracket
lines
it
before and the after.
They'll change the type or something.
And they'll have a little footnote saying this isn't in the earliest and best manuscripts, so they don't think it's Scripture. The same thing with Mark's ending of Mark's Gospel.
Yeah.
Mark 6, verses 9 through 20, majority of manuscripts contain it, but some early don't. Those would be your biggest issues, but I'm extremely confident both of those are Scripture. And then there's a short section in 1 John 5, verses 5 through 7, called the Johannine comma, which I do not believe is part of the original manuscript. It's found in some manuscripts, but it's not found in the majority of manuscripts. The majority text doesn't include it.
So for those passages there's a question mark over them. But for the most part, the Bible that we have today is trustworthy.
Right.
Now, translations add
that's
like a layer.
another issue.
Translations add a layer of complication to that because you're never going to have an inerrant English translation.
Exactly. So what a lot of people do is they compare English translations, right? If they can't read Greek or Hebrew, they will compare English translations, and that's a good approach, I think. But better would be to learn Greek and Hebrew.
Yeah.
And then you can look at the Greek and the Hebrew.
So what does that mean in practice? Does that mean people can't, should they not trust the Bible? Is this devastating for Christianity, not having an inerrant copies?
Not at all. The fact that there's some spelling questions in the New and Old Testament is no big deal. And if you have a New King James Version, which I do, they even have footnotes that tell you where there are variations. Mm-hmm. But the good news is no major doctrine of Scripture is influenced by any of the variations.
Right.
Only little minor points would be at stake. And so whether a person is using a translation that I would think would be a good one, like, for example, I think the New King James or the King James is pretty good translation of the majority text, except when the TR varies from the majority text. But even if you're using something like the NIV or the New American Standard Bible or the Net Bible, which follow the critical text, you're still getting, for the most part, everything right. The problem on those translations is not the text they're looking at. It's sometimes they introduce their own theology. For example, in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, they will insert any so-called brother, whereas the Greek they're looking at says anyone bearing the name brother or anyone named brother. But they read their theology in it and call it a so-called brother as though, well, this really isn't a brother. But that's not what the Greek says. So you need to be a little bit suspect of translations to make sure they accurately translate the underlying Greek. Mm-hmm. We have articles on our website people can look at faithalone.org.
Yeah.
I have 2 articles comparing 7 leading translations.
Right, and then I wrote a third one, companion one, doing 7 more. Maybe I should make that into an ebook that people can download. We have a bunch of free ebooks at our website, by the way, faithalone.org. Okay. I'll make an ebook of it. Colby, I hope that answers your question about the Bible, and be sure to check out those articles, 7 Bible translations. Be sure to check out our website for more info on this and other topics.
Thank you guys for that great discussion. Would you like to deepen your understanding of Scripture in the Christian life? Well, a great place to start is our website. It's faithalone.org. That's faithalone.org. We've got all kinds of free materials on the site available for you. One of those, which is extremely popular, is our magazine, Grace in Focus. It comes out 6 times a year. It's full color, easy to read, and people are really growing who read it. So come and get a subscription at faithalone.org. We would like to thank all of our financial partners who help us keep this show going. All gifts are tax deductible and very much appreciated. If you'd like to find out how you can be a financial partner, visit us at faithalone.org. We are so happy when we hear from listeners just like you. Maybe you've got a question, comment, or feedback. If so, please send us a message. Here's our email address. It's radio@faithalone.org. That's radio@faithalone.org. Thanks for joining us. We look forward to being back with you tomorrow. I'm Lucas Kitchen with the Grace Evangelical Society. And until next time, let's keep grace in focus.
The proceeding has been a listener-supported ministry from the Grace Evangelical Society.